Chapter 24. Zhong. A long line of armored personnel carriers trundled south along Highway 101, passing through Santa Rosa and heading toward San Francisco. The APCs bore the insignia of the KPA, and the vehicles' bellies were full of KPA men, weapons, and materials needed for waging war. The massive 1,200-vehicle convoy had met with surprisingly little resistance since leaving Portland, Oregon several days earlier. The number of vehicles would dwindle as the convoy positioned units in the towns along their route to the south. By the time they reached the Los Angeles basin, they'd be down to only a couple hundred vehicles. There were also other factors to account for, like breakdowns and the remote possibility some Americans got lucky and disabled any of the armored vehicles. There had been a few instances where small arms had been fired at the convoy, but a rapid response in the form of heavy machine gun fire had put an immediate stop to the harassment. None of the soldiers were injured, and the vehicles were designed to take much more punishment than rifle fire. The Chinese-made ZBL-09 armored personnel carriers weren't particularly fast, and their engines siphoned diesel from their fuel tanks like it was going out of style. That made for very slow going along their southerly route. At each pre-designated refueling depot, several APCs would peel from the group, taking with them the soldiers they carried to set up and maintain that particular refueling stop. The men soon realized they'd be on an island were the Americans able to mount an attack on a single depot. The men could call on air support, but with air superiority still up for grabs, it came down to a coin toss as to whether they could rely on air assets during a prolonged fight. Approaching a town called Petaluma, Byung Ho Jong, who held the North Korean equivalent to an army captain, looked over his map one last time. He swiveled his gaze to his second-in-command, Sergeant Hun Hayon, who sat dutifully waiting orders. "We are close, Hun." Hun gave a slow bow of his head in acknowledgement. The two men were about to be one of 8 linchpins that held the convoy route in place by safeguarding their refueling depot. Both men knew there would be more than just fuel under their care. Fuel, however, was the most important resource to the North Korean invasion. Once the fighting intensified, if it did, ammunition may prove a more important commodity, but for now, it remained the fuel. A shift in the APC's engine whine told them they were slowing, which meant they'd arrived. In planning, Zhong chose a spot for their base of operations where Washington Street crossed over Highway 101. Any measures he could take to foil the Americans' efforts to identify and target him, he'd do. Hiding his refueling depot under an overpass wasn't foolproof, but it added a layer of security from the prying eyes in the skies. China assured the North Korean commanders that Chinese assets would establish air superiority by taking away America's #1 standoff weapon, the drone. Zhong hadn't been briefed on the condition of the skies, but his calls for air support during the first time they'd come under small arms fire had quickly been denied. China did not yet command the skies. That, coupled with the fact that the convoy hadn't been bombed, told Zhong no one yet had air superiority. He drew in a deep breath as his APC ground to a halt, then blew out through his nostrils. He could feel the pressure coming from his impending responsibility toward the efforts of his country to control the great devil of the West, America. The door on the APC opened, and the two men exited with their troops, blinking in the bright sunlight. The roar of the other APC engines continued as the rest of the convoy continued south, leaving the 2 APCs assigned to Zhong's refueling depot behind. Each APC housed a crew of 3 KPA men, while 10 more soldiers rode in the troop cargo section. Zhong had 26 men, including himself and Haiyun, to set up, operate, and defend the refueling depot. Surveying the highway from the ground, Zhong directed one of the APCs to the northbound lanes, while he kept the APC he'd ridden in parked under the overpass in the southbound lanes. He would use the APC's crew and heavy firepower to defend the fuel bladders at his refueling depot. Zhong ordered the APCs positioned to block the highway in a manner so they could be pulled off the lanes to allow other North Korean equipment through the route. He knew it wouldn't be long, maybe a few hours before trucks carrying resupply resources would begin to arrive. Zhang pressed his soldiers to hurry in their endeavors to fortify their position along the highway. The men filled sandbags with dirt and rock dug from the shoulder of the Highway 101. It was slow and very difficult work in the dry, rocky soil. In a matter of hours, the area looked more like a checkpoint than a California roadway. Sandbagged bunkers and armored vehicles bristling with weapons blocked the once heavily traveled highway. Once the bunkers were built to waist high, Zhang ordered several KPA soldiers to cut back any vegetation within 100 yards of their position. In a day or two, more soldiers would occupy the area, taking up quarters at the Sonoma County Fairgrounds several miles north of Petaluma. That would become a regional headquarters and detention facility for any locals deemed a threat to the KPA occupation. The Sonoma County Fairgrounds were mostly surrounded by chain-link fencing and 3 strands of barbed wire that ran along the fence's top. People in the area who were deemed unfit or too dangerous to remain at large would be rounded up and kept at the fairgrounds to be used as laborers. The list of potential prisoners would include gun owners, local politicians who proved uncooperative with the KPA, curfew violators, and anyone failing to follow the KPA's controlled movement rules. Soon, the entire area would be under lockdown, and the American people controlled by their new masters. Where they went and what times they could move about the city would be harshly enforced. This would bring order to the region. The KPA men would give no quarter to violators of these rules. A stir of voices at the front of the warehouse brought Cam and the rest of his curious family up to investigate. There, they found the 2 Green Berets holding the double glass doors open as the Bayet brothers pulled a 4-passenger golf cart into the building. The brothers beamed with pride as the group gathered around the little cart. Cam stood off to the side while Alex, Manny, and Jim marveled at the only working mode of motorized transportation they'd seen in over a week. "It's got no armor." Mike rocked the tiny vehicle with his foot, chuckling. "Beats walking," Tim said with a grunt. Mike nodded. "Sure does." "Where'd you find it?" Alex asked, looking at the Bayet brothers. The question elicited an immediate change in the room's atmosphere as both brothers recoiled at the cop's question. Mike held up a hand, shaking his head. "Who cares where they got it? We got it now, and that's all that matters." Alex's mouth dropped. "Yeah, I wasn't tripping on them. I meant, where'd they get it, and can we get another one?" Mike's gaze fell on Rostam, brows raised. "Can you?" Rostam shrugged. "Yeah, I guess, if you look around. There are a lot of things that run or could run with a little work. We just have to go out and find them." "Like what?" Tim asked, leaning on the front of the golf cart. "ATVs, older trucks, or cars?" Rostam jutted his chin at the cart. "These things and pretty much anything older and uncomplicated seem to either run or can be fixed." Darian pushed off the wall he'd leaned against. "You need gas, though. As much as we can find." "Yeah," Mike agreed. Cam stepped forward and laid a hand on the cart. "Can you take Jen and the kids to my parents now?" Mike turned to Rostam. "How far can this thing go?" "Where does it need to go?" Mike looked over at Cam expectantly. "Probably 20 miles round trip, maybe a little further." "I know where an old truck that'd be better is," Rostam answered. Mike looked back at Cam. "If he can get a working truck, then yes, I'll have someone run them out there." Jim raised a hand in Cam's direction. "Hey, I know that area pretty well and can get your family just about anywhere you need them." Cam grabbed a map and showed the older policeman where the Griffin ranch was. He called it a ranch because his father kept chickens, goats, and usually 3 or 4 head of cattle, but it wasn't an actual ranch as much as it was his father's hobby. After the excitement wore off over the arrival of the golf cart, the Bayat brothers left to find the truck. The rest of the men sat around the front of the warehouse watching the front parking lot area. There wasn't much going on in the area. Only a couple of times did any of them see another person amble past the warehouse, unaware it was full of armed militiamen, the germinating seed of a resistance. Cam spent time with Jen, getting the kids ready while quietly arguing with her about whether he should come with them or remain with Mike and the rest of the men. He tried explaining that he owed them for taking the Griffins in and now transporting them to the safety of his parents' place, but Jen wasn't having it. He didn't have another way to pay that debt. A favor owed to rough men who only accepted payment in the form of armed participation had to be paid accordingly. In his case, that was disrupting the North Korean effort to occupy America. Loud gunfire erupted somewhere in the distance. The weapon making the racket was a large machine gun. That much Cam was sure of. He raced to the front of the store where everyone crouched, peering through the glass front. "What the hell's going on?" he asked as he crept forward, holding his rifle at the low ready while his thumb hovered over the selector lever. "Big guns are hammering some poor soul," Tim muttered. The sound of a racing engine caused everyone in the warehouse to lift their rifles in that direction. Seconds later, a 1980s model Toyota pickup truck rounded the corner. The engine revved again, and Cam could tell trouble must be following. Rostam was at the wheel of the vehicle as it skidded to a stop in front of the warehouse. The doors flew open as the brothers spilled out, scrambling for the doors. Breathlessly, Rostam and Darian crashed through the front doors, their faces pale with fear. Cam glanced back out into the streets, wondering what the hell the two brothers had gotten themselves into. "Tanks! They've got tanks, and they tried to kill us!" Rostam blurted out as he nearly fell into the warehouse, still trying to catch his breath. Mike grabbed him by the shoulders and gave him a quick shake. "Tanks?" "Yeah, tanks with guns on top. Shut the truck up, with us in it," Darian said from where he stood off to Mike's right, his face a mixture of fright and anger. "Tanks or APCs?" Mike demanded, his face flushed and serious. Cam examined the truck and saw 3 jagged tears in the side of the bed where 3 large caliber rounds found their mark. Probably a 12.7 millimeter heavy gun, he thought. "What's the difference?" Darian asked. "There's a difference," Cam said, pointing at the perforations in the truck's bed. "A tank would have blown the truck up." Mike pushed the front door open and stepped outside, cautiously looking up and down the street before approaching the little pickup truck. Cam, the Bayet brothers, and the 3 cops followed, hands clutching their weapons. "What in the hell is going on?" Manny murmured under his breath as he took in the bullet holes. "We're at war, fellas," Tim stated, as if the question actually needed answering. "We gotta change things up, guys," Cam said hesitantly. "Like what?" Mike asked, turning back to Cam. "Like, when one of us gets into trouble, they can't race back here where we all live. That's gonna get us all killed. I think we should move out of this place. Too many people know we're already here." "Go on," Mike pressed. "The families of everyone who is helping you need to be moved out of the city and hidden. They need to know that if we're found out, or even if these Korean or Chinese troops figure out one of our names, they'll go after our families." Mike nodded his understanding. "We need to fight these bastards like they fought us in the Middle East. We stay hidden and stick to small unit tactics that allow us to fade into the local populace." Mike glanced up and down the street again before waving everyone back inside the warehouse. "Let's get off the streets, people. Too many bad actors out there." Back inside, the group reconvened and Mike prompted Cam to continue. "Well, I mean, we should think about what we did overseas to ID the people we either kidnapped or killed. This invading force will use similar methods." Mike nodded. "Hide our faces?" "Wear gloves," Cam added. "The Chinese have either been given data by weak White House administrations or outright hacked in and stolen it from so many different sources, I lost track over the years. I think we should approach fighting back like a criminal would approach committing a crime. We hide our identities, cover our tracks, and leave as little evidence behind as possible." "Are you saying paint our faces?" Alex questioned. Cam shook his head. No way, man. Masks and gloves. Mike and Tim, you two need to lose the military garb. We all dress in a manner that we could drop a pack, rifle, mask, and gloves and blend into a neighborhood. I also think it's prudent to keep the fact that we're doing all this from anyone else. If they don't know about us, they can't inform." "What about when they start killing innocent civilians because of what we're doing?" Manny demanded, bringing up the elephant in the room. Cam shot Mike a look, who in turn shot Tim a look. Tim had already seen the buck-passing looks coming his way and pivoted slightly so as to allow Mike's gaze to meet his own. The demand hung heavy in the air for a moment before Cam answered. "The weak ones will want to give us up, join forces with the Koreans, and do whatever they have to in order to stop the killing, torture, or whatever discomfort is being heaped on them. The stronger people in the community will be angry. Some will want to join us, and the rest will do their best to support us. We can never get sloppy when dealing with anyone who is helping us. If we do, they die. The group talked a while longer, with both Green Berets weighing in on Cam's suggestions with their own thoughts and opinions. There was a lot of talk about the men out in the field who'd volunteered to scout and report back. They all knew about the warehouse and the 2 Green Berets. Most knew a fair number of other members by first and last name as well. After an hour of discussion and no real conclusions other than what Cam had suggested, the group dispersed. The 2 Green Berets left the warehouse with the Bayet brothers to do some shopping. They went in search of civilian-type clothing for themselves and masks and gloves for the entire group. Cam talked to Jim about getting his wife to Sonoma where his parents could look after them while he went back to a trade he'd hoped never to revisit for as long as he lived. Jim agreed, but wanted to talk to the Bayet brothers about exactly where they'd seen the Koreans with the tank or APC. He wanted to avoid any interaction with their enemy. Afterward, Cam went to the back of the warehouse where he found Jen and the kids lounging on padded, fold-out chairs. The kids leaned in close as Jen read from a classic children's adventure book, of all things. Bemused, he asked, "Where'd you find that?" She looked up and smiled tiredly. "The store here has a bunch of older classic kids' books." As she took up the story again, he pulled a chair over and sat, listening quietly. He watched his 2 children as they drank in the adventures of a single man stranded on an island far from the lavish comforts of his home. Living on the island, he endured the savageries of the not-so-fictional island life of the early 1700s.